The story begins with a lonely man, his body bound by chains, aimlessly traversing a sprawling desert landscape. In this desolate expanse, the remnants of deceased animals litter the terrain, casting a grim shadow over his path. His unrelenting quest is for water, a precious commodity in this arid wasteland. However, as he finally touches the water he sought so desperately, a horrifying realization dawns upon him. The liquid seems to possess a malevolent force, causing his very being to crumble. His teeth disintegrate, his skin threatens to melt, and even his bones seem on the precipice of dissolution. Lost and overwhelmed, he grapples with the enigma of his existence in this forsaken desert, questioning why he has been forsaken to this lonely and agonizing fate. Amidst the chaos of his torment, a voice emerges from the ether, beckoning his attention. The voice inquires about his desires, prompting him to plead for mercy and aid. He cries out in desperation, begging for a reprieve from his suffering. Abruptly, he awakens from a fitful slumber, jolted by the presence of his master before him. She stands regally in a gown of vibrant ruby red, her eyes the only feature exposed through a mask that obscures the rest of her face. The man realizes his grave error in succumbing to sleep while his master is near. Punishment is inevitable. Bowing low, tears tracing down his cheeks, he presses his lips to the tips of her shoes, fervently seeking forgiveness. A faint smile tugs at the corners of her lips as she observes his earnest contrition. She beckons to her loyal companion, a creature named Illyana, whose good behavior is met with gentle caresses. This man knows that his world of reward and suffering hinges upon the capricious whim of his mistress. Yet, this time, an unsettling shift hangs in the air, an unfamiliarity that leaves him bewildered.
Her voice cuts through the tension, commanding the man to rise and handing him a small vial.
The promise of her departure hangs heavy in the air. The man's body tenses, uncertainty gnawing at him. Was this the end? Was this vial a lethal elixir, a final act of liberation from her dominion? With a measured voice, she dispels his fears. The vial contains an antidote, a remedy for the nefarious substance he was compelled to ingest. Her purpose, it seems, is not to sever their bond but to cleanse the toxic residue of his torment. And then she departs, walking away without a glance in his direction. His pleas and tears, his ardent attempts to earn her favor, had not shifted her resolve. He was left to grapple with a startling truth. His unwavering devotion had not forged the connection he so desperately sought. As her carriage comes to a halt, she arrives at a grand mansion, her sanctuary from the world. The grandeur of her abode contrasts starkly with the unforgiving desert from which the man had emerged. In her chambers, she dismisses the prospect of dinner, requesting solitude. The weight of her own thoughts presses upon her. Within the confines of her room, she exhales a sigh that bears the weight of relief and contemplation. The narrative that had been etched in the annals of fate was clear. The villainy of Illyana would eventually converge with the beast Magnus, culminating in her demise. Yet, in the wake of her introspection, doubts assail her. She knows that she will have to find a way back as she has already possessed the role of the villainess of the story. Echoes of elusive memories dance on the edges of her consciousness, reminders of the enigmatic email she stumbled upon before her transference into this new world, where she has become the embodiment of the villainess, Illyana. Amidst the turbulent trials of her existence, she recalls that fateful night when she first encountered the tale of Illyana, the villainess she now embodies. In the throes of her personal tribulations, she found herself drawn into the narrative, a story that would reshape her destiny. The tale revolved around a villainess who took in a wretched boy, nurturing him into her very own beast. Using a forbidden drug and a unique power known solely to her, she warped his mind, offering him a twisted form of affection that became his sole source of warmth. This toxic bond seemed akin to a leash, confining the beast's soul. Yet, against all expectations, he shattered these chains and fled. His journey would lead him to another, igniting love and transforming him into a human once more. With newfound purpose, he returned to his rightful place as a prince of the empire, destined to become its emperor, while his beloved would become the empress. A narrative culminating in revenge against the very villainess who had ensnared him. This story, though captivating, left her disconcerted, plagued by a bitter aftertaste. She reached out to the author in search of clarity, questioning the nature of love between the villainess and the beast, the intricacies of their relationship, and the ultimate fate of the villainess. The author's response, "I don't know the ending," ignited a maelstrom of emotions within her. How could the creator not be privy to the culmination of their own creation? Regret soon settled in, for those words unwittingly paved the path for her current predicament. When she next awoke, she was no longer herself, but the very villainess she sought answers about, Illyana Glane. Now bound by the threads of fate, she was forced to retrace the steps of Illyana's life, mimicking her every move. Each morning brought the same cruel reality. She remained trapped within Illyana's identity, gazing upon a face foreign to her own. The maid, a fixture of this new life, delivered her breakfast and announced the Marquis Daisy's tea party, a name that evoked no personal connection. The realization that her newfound existence didn't grant her knowledge of the world she now inhabited bewildered her. In a bid to regain control, she commanded the cancellation of appointments for the week, perplexing the maid with her unfamiliar behavior. As the maids prepared her bath, she was once again confronted with her altered reality. The act of undressing felt alien, and as they left her to soak, the absence of assistance during the bath perplexed her. This world demanded customs she didn't entirely comprehend, leading her to question her place within its intricate tapestry. As her gaze fell upon her own reflection in the water, she observed bruises of purplish-yellow hue mar her skin. These marks remained unexplained, mirroring the sense of disorientation that gripped her. With a burgeoning sense of trepidation, she pondered the origin of these blemishes and the mysteries that shrouded her new existence. The maids deftly assisted her in dressing, a new experience that brought forth further discomfort. The weight of propriety dictated that she accept their aid, a realization that underscored her unfamiliarity with the customs befitting her status. Requesting tea, she waited with a book in hand, perplexed by her ability to speak and write the language so fluently, despite her unfamiliarity with its intricacies. As the maid returned with the tea, Illyana abruptly closed the gap between them, her sudden movement catching the servant off guard. She disclosed her desire to meet a reticent young man and instructed the maid to do so discreetly. Addressing the pressing issue of Magnus's drug addiction took precedence, for it held the key to altering the story's outcome. Breaking free from Illyana's narrative became her mission, one that demanded she atone for the character's transgressions. Her resolve to undo the web of Illyana's wrongdoings was driven by a need to retrieve Magnus and rectify his plight. Yet, her preference for solitude at home wrestled with concerns of her safety, amplified by the bruises she bore. These marks raised unsettling questions. Were they evidence of domestic abuse or self-inflicted wounds? The chasm of her own forgotten past and Illyana's transformation into a villainess frustrated her. Upon entering, Magnus greeted her with deference, genuflecting in a display of servitude. She swiftly bid him to rise, noting that the original Illyana had bestowed the name Mag upon him. His eager anticipation of praise was palpable, rooted in his identity as Illyana's devoted beast. Illyana had wielded a drug named Ray to subjugate him, leveraging her ability of dream manipulation. However, she now stood bereft of that power, relegated to her own enigmatic identity. Resolving to rectify the situation, she decreed that he should no longer greet her on bended knee. Panic surged through him, and his pleas for forgiveness rang out. Collapsing in anguish, he begged for her mercy, driven by the lingering grip of Ray's influence. Recognizing his torment, she gently reassured him, her touch a balm for his desperation. It was clear that a single antidote couldn't sever the chains of addiction instantaneously. After his tremors subsided, she conveyed her commitment to his well-being, pledging not to forsake him. With measured composure, she informed him of a visitor tasked with assessing his health. Guiding him to the bed, she instructed him to close his eyes and remain still. With a simple command, she beckoned her guest, Carl, to enter. The hooded figure's imposing presence loomed, a scar etched across his face serving as a testament to his fearsome history. Despite his attempt to conceal his visage, the scar bore witness to a past of hardship and trials. Remaining obedient to Illyana's directive, Mag remained still with his eyes tightly shut, his trepidation palpable. Illyana watched him anxiously, her hands clasped together in a mixture of anticipation and unease. Her mind was at ease as long as Mag's eyes remained sealed, ensuring his true identity remained hidden. The distinct hue of his deep golden eyes betrayed his royal lineage, a trait passed down exclusively through the imperial family. As Carl tended to Mag's needs, Illyana's apprehension simmered beneath her composed facade. She recognized the significance of this clandestine examination, a scrutiny that ventured beyond the superficial. With Carl's departure, Mag was granted the permission to unveil his eyes. A soft expression of affection adorned his face as he turned his gaze toward her. The moment had arrived for them to depart, a transition Mag greeted with a torrent of tears and impassioned pleas. Illyana swiftly muffled his outpouring, her hand covering his mouth, and assured him that his actions were not a transgression. Her heart ached as she considered the predicament Mag found himself in, a situation largely orchestrated by Illyana herself. Mag's demeanor resembled that of a dejected puppy as he remained on his knees. Illyana's gentle ruffling of his hair and the caress of his cheek seemed to quell his distress, his response akin to a contented nuzzle. Satisfied with this temporary solace, Illyana left, her departure tinged with a mix of emotion. Upon rejoining Carl outside, her suspicions were confirmed. Mag's addiction to Ray was indeed as she had surmised. Ray, a toxic substance initially employed to subjugate slaves, wielded the power to erode reason and stability after prolonged use. Remarkably, despite a 3-year-long addiction, Mag exhibited a better state than Carl had anticipated, suggesting controlled administration. Illyana inquired about the detoxification process, and Carl explained the need for gradual reduction of Ray intake alongside the administration of the antidote. Their 6-month timeline aimed to purge Mag's body of the drug, though the mental battle against addiction would persist. Illyana harbored confidence in Mag's strength to overcome this ordeal. Carl was entrusted with the preparation of a 6-month supply of the antidote, a secret that should never escape his lips. Illyana's stern warning underscored the gravity of this discretion. As she entered the carriage, a cold glance conveyed the repercussions awaiting Carl if he disregarded her caution. The carriage began its journey, and as it rolled along, Illyana's habitual sigh escaped her. She reflected on the inherent conflict of her actions, how a simple touch had betrayed her desire to maintain a boundary she had unwittingly transgressed. A cold demeanor, the facade she had employed, slipped away in a moment of tenderness. The truth was undeniable. Her gesture had been as instinctive as breathing, an act that carried more significance than she initially perceived. The revelation emphasized the challenge she faced in untangling herself from the intricate web Illyana had woven. Despite Mag's liberation from the clutches of mind control, his eventual return to the palace was inevitable. The carriage's path diverged, and when given the choice to proceed to the mansion, Illyana's response was firm. The temple awaited her, a setting harboring its own mysteries and revelations. Illyana found herself before the temple's grand entrance, where a priest awaited her arrival. The sight of a noble lady visiting such a place sparked intrigue among the common folk who had gathered to observe. It was a rare sight indeed, as temples were typically attended by the commoners seeking solace through prayer. Illyana wore an innocent smile, a veneer of purity that masked her true intentions. To the priest's inquiry about her presence, Illyana replied that she had come to seek spiritual solace and commune with God through prayer. The priest ushered her within, and hushed whispers spread through the crowd. Illyana's reputation for kindness became the topic of discussion among the people. She found solace in the fact that, despite her nefarious true nature, at least her public image bore a positive semblance. Stepping into the sacred confines, Illyana noticed a congregation of commoners deep in prayer. Mindful of her plan to manipulate perceptions, she removed her hat, revealing her identity to the onlookers. It was imperative that her presence be noted, for she had a web of deceit to spin. Approaching the priest, Illyana fabricated a tale of a divine encounter. She shared that during a fever-induced delirium, God had visited her in a dream. Remarkably, upon waking, her ailment had vanished as if it had never existed. The priest nodded, interpreting her story as a sign of divine favor. Eager to project her newfound devotion, Illyana proposed to spread God's benevolence among the people. This proclamation was nothing but a ruse. Illyana's true motive was to cultivate an image of unswerving faith in the temple. Unlike other institutions, the temple existed beyond the empire's sphere of influence, a sanctuary she sought to manipulate for her own ends. Led to a secluded chamber, Illyana was introduced to a space for prayer, its centerpiece a donation box. The priest elucidated that generous benefactors often received certificates of religion. This tidbit of information aligned perfectly with Illyana's intentions. Though her current wealth was limited, she made a mental note to contribute more on subsequent visits. In the present moment, she withdrew a solid gold bar, the priest's eyes lighting up at its sight. The priest's exclamation of surprise reverberated through the room as he fell to his knees, offering prayers of gratitude to Lord Rigneba for the unexpected bounty. Illyana stood perplexed by his fervent response, but she played along. This spontaneous act of devotion only served to bolster her illusion. Apologizing for his outburst, the priest explained that he was expressing gratitude for her presence. He promptly issued her a temporary certificate of religion, informing her that a permanent one would take a week to process. In addition, she was granted free access to explore the temple grounds. Illyana deposited her donation into the box and assumed the posture of prayer, silently beseeching that her orchestrated events would unfurl as planned. Her whispered supplication echoed in the sanctified chamber. As she departed in her carriage, an inexplicable chill ran down her spine, an eerie sensation that momentarily unsettled her. Meanwhile, back at the lodge, Magnus found himself alone in the dark, tears streaming down his face. The question of what he had done wrong hung heavily in the air, his confusion a stark testament to his fragile state of mind. Noticing the reappearance of missing books on the bookshelf, the maid inferred that Illyana must have finished her bath. Meanwhile, Illyana sat on a sofa, her thoughts consumed by Magnus. Over the past week, she had provided him with several books to aid his understanding of the world beyond his confines. As the maids assisted her in dressing, one of them expressed concern that the master and his wife had returned from inspecting the estate. The impending request for a family dinner raised alarm among the servants. In response, the maid removed Illyana's jewelry, necklace and bracelets, as a precautionary measure. Illyana, however, found herself puzzled by this gesture. Why would her jewelry need to be removed due to her father's return? The maid's anxious expressions only deepened her confusion. Descending the staircase, Illyana made her way to the door, intent on checking on Magnus. A voice halted her progress, a man's voice inquiring about her destination. It was Marquis Glane, her father, who stood there. She informed him of her intent to visit the temple, As he passed her, he reminded her of their upcoming dinner. Punctuality was of utmost importance to him. She bowed deeply in acknowledgement, fully understanding the gravity of her father's expectations. Seated within the carriage, Illyana's body was seized by cold hands and trembling. An unsettling sensation churned in the pit of her stomach, a feeling she recognized well, fear. This was a response not entirely her own. After all, she inhabited Illyana's body. Her emotions, determined not to be swayed by these alien sentiments, Illyana resolved to regain control over the situation. The resolve within her was firm. She would not allow herself to be governed by this body's emotions. Illyana engaged in a discussion with Carl outside the lodge, laying out the path ahead. He explained that after about 6 months of treatment, Magnus's condition would significantly improve. Despite her desire for a faster recovery, Carl asserted the necessity of gradual progress. Yet, Illyana discerned the truth. His words were tainted by fear, stemming from the belief that once his utility had waned, she would dispose of him. Her command to do your best carried a subtle undercurrent of determination as she walked past him, her intentions unwavering. Entering the lodge, she was met by Magnus, who set aside his book and approached her. In spite of his Ray addiction, his intellectual prowess remained intact as he continued to absorb knowledge through reading. His genuineness shone, revealing his inherent brilliance. Kneeling before her, he humbly kissed her foot, a gesture of greeting fraught with questions about her prolonged absence. Illyana's touch reassured him that he had done nothing wrong. Yet the lingering brainwashing weighed on her, leaving her anxious for its dissipation. She wished for the lingering effects of the manipulation to wane, granting her a sense of liberation. Time seemed to stretch endlessly, each moment an excruciating reminder of her captivity. He longed for her companionship, yearning for the warmth that once defined their interactions. But her behavior had changed. The embraces and kisses were fewer, replaced by a seemingly distant demeanor. Sensing his growing curiosity, Illyana encouraged him to ask questions, evoking panic as he recognized the boundaries he must not transgress. Her smile reassured him, acknowledging his newfound awareness with praise. Her gentle commendation elicited a blush from him, his bashful response a testament to his genuine nature. The unexpected question she posed caught him off guard. Did he wish to be with her? Stammering nervously, he confessed his desire, hesitantly expressing his yearning for Miss Lena. However, his words trailed off, replaced by an impulsive action. A forceful kiss shattered the air, followed by Illyana's swift rejection, her emotions overwhelming her. Kneeling again, he pleaded for her understanding, vowing to behave more like a beast to secure his place by her side. Kissing her ankle, his desperation laid bare, revealing a subconscious surrender to Illyana's manipulation. Illyana recognized the truth in that moment. Magnus had once again succumbed to the insidious influence she sought to undo. Her voice reverberated through the room, commanding him to halt his actions. Confusion clouded his features as he lowered his head onto her legs, a gesture of obedience. Yet, her gaze averted, cheeks flushed, revealing her complex emotions. The situation left him perplexed. Was her dissatisfaction with him as a beast evident in her reaction? He joined her on the sofa, his demeanor carrying a perpetual chill, a stark reminder of his solitude and isolation. The weight of his loneliness bore heavily upon him, leading him to hide his face and weep, the pain of isolation and emptiness consuming him. Illyana's empathy stirred within her, witnessing the desolation that had gripped Magnus during his time confined to this lodge, his only interaction originating from the original Illyana. Overcoming her initial hesitation, she reached out and embraced him, offering comfort in her arms. Assuring him that he could reciprocate the gesture, she acknowledged the need for human touch. The warmth of her affection filled the void within him, and he savored the sensation of her touch. Recounting Lady Lena's designation of him as her lovable beast, he clung to the connection it represented, seeking solace in her acknowledgement. Yet, his demeanor shifted abruptly, his embrace retreating as he expressed his self-imposed label of beast. He struggled with his identity, grappling with the profound effects of the drugs that had ravaged his memory and sense of self for years. Illyana proposed dining together, eliciting a delighted response from Magnus. The prospect of spending time with her brought joy to his heart, though he recognized the fleeting nature of such interaction. Expressing his gratitude, he kissed her foot, a gesture ingrained as a sign of appreciation. As Illyana moved towards the door, her thoughts churned with the unpredictability of Magnus's actions. Yet, a deeper concern gnawed at her, the inexplicable physical reactions she experienced in his presence. The involuntary racing of her heart and the tingling sensation on her lips mirrored her earlier response to her father's fear-inducing presence. The confusion stemming from her physical responses deepened as she pondered whether the original Illyana had harbored romantic feelings for Magnus, an incongruity given their apparent relationship. Seeking clarity, Illyana ordered a meal for both of them. Her contemplation led her to question the nature of their past interactions. Observing Magnus seated on the floor, she wondered if the original Illyana had treated him like a pet, to which he clarified that such treatment had been a response to her anger. Guiding him to a chair, she underscored his humanity, urging him to discard the previous instructions he had received. The servants' arrival with their meals prompted Magnus to inquire about spending another night together. Illyana's arm tightened in thought, her plan to liberate him simmering beneath the surface. Aware of his solitude, she promised to spend an entire night with him the following week. His gratitude was palpable, yet the fervor in his eyes spoke volumes. He yearned for that night to arrive soon, and his anticipation manifested in his gaze. Standing outside the cabin, Illyana observed Magnus engrossed in his book. The books she had provided and the antidote she had administered were meant to expedite his eventual departure. She held the belief that within 2 months, he would naturally seek freedom. During this period, it would be prudent for them to avoid each other's company. If fate had indeed bound the female lead and Magnus, their paths would intersect during his escape. In her hands lay the delicate art of relinquishing control and entrusting their destinies to the hands of fate. Instructing the coachman to transport her to the temple, Illyana ascended the temple steps, finding the priest stationed before the altar, a donation box within his gaze. Her inquiry was specific, a desire to find a devoted congregation where she could practice her faith among kindred souls. The priest, however, informed her that no such congregation existed. Yet, an alternative intrigued her: priestly training, where acolytes delved into understanding God's will under the condition of residing within the temple dormitories. Eager to manipulate time to her advantage, Illyana inquired about the duration of this training. 2 years was the commitment required, aligning neatly with her plan. This span would facilitate the storyline's progression, ensuring her absence during the critical period when her path might cross Magnus's. Professing her interest, she faced the priest's solemn gaze. He scrutinized her, as if peering into her intentions. Responding to his unspoken question, Illyana conveyed her aspiration to draw closer to God. A smile finally graced the priest's countenance, accompanied by the proffered application form. The looming departure 2 weeks hence required swift action. Illyana needed to sign and submit the form before then. The prospect of joining this training held significance, not only for her desire to immerse herself in spiritual pursuits but also as a strategic maneuver to shape the unfolding narrative. Returning to the mansion, a commotion caught Illyana's attention. The Marquis's unexpected departure to address an emergency estate matter brought an involuntary exhale of relief. The specter of encountering her father receded momentarily, granting her a respite. Retreating to her room, Illyana declared her intention to forego dinner and solitude. She had 2 weeks to amass essential knowledge before her departure, and the room's search commenced with fervor. Her aim was simple: to glean insights from Illyana's personal accounts. Drawers and compartments yielded no results, until a concealed button revealed an unexpected treasure trove. A hidden notebook lay concealed, triggering a surge of curiosity. The contents unveiled a perplexing reality: diary entries that appeared to chronicle events yet to unfold, punctuated with dates from the imperial calendar, including November 13, 931, noted as the day the beast ran away. The anomaly fueled her bewilderment, leaving Illyana trapped in a maze of confusion. The lines between the present, the past, and the future blurred, as the questions posed by the paradoxical contents of the diary multiplied. How could an event yet to transpire be etched within Illyana's past? Illyana stood before the open diary, her thoughts spiraling into a bewildering abyss. The revelation that the entries extended beyond imperial year 930 shattered her understanding of the narrative's boundaries. The diary, once thought to be a vessel of past recollections, now contained foreknowledge of future events. As her eyes scanned the pages, her mind struggled to reconcile the intricacies woven into the fabric of fate. Her own meticulous handwriting detailed events yet to unfold, each entry seemingly orchestrated with purpose. A shiver coursed down her spine as she encountered an entry that dictated the exact date she intended to set Magnus free. The realization dawned on her: she had deliberately released him. Her role in this intricate tapestry seemed to transcend the bounds of mere character, suggesting a manipulation beyond her comprehension. Questions swarmed like relentless bees, forming an impenetrable fog in her mind. Had Illyana possessed the power of foresight all along? If so, the story's events were no longer confined to the realm of chance. They were predetermined by her design. Her exile, the sequence of actions, even Magnus's rebellion, were they all orchestrated by her hand? With furrowed brows, Illyana's fingers tugged at her hair in frustration, attempting to unravel the knots within her thoughts. Her eyes returned to the pages of the diary, seeking answers within the ink-stained revelations. Had someone given her this diary? An idea floated at the edges of her mind. Perhaps the author held the key to her confusion. Why had the author claimed ignorance when questioned about the story's ending? Did they intend for Illyana to uncover these revelations herself? An urgency gnawed at her, the need to find closure and understanding. Could the answers she sought be the very key to her return home? If only she knew how to unlock them. Yet, despite her fervent attempts, comprehension remained elusive. The words on the pages seemed to dance beyond her grasp, taunting her with their enigmatic truths. Weariness descended upon her, as if the weight of these revelations bore down on her soul. She sought solace, seeking refuge within her thoughts. As she stared into the void, memories of the novel's conclusion resurfaced. The sinister fate that awaited Illyana and Magnus hung over her like a shadow. Magnus's vengeance, his brutal act of retribution against her family, and her subsequent imprisonment, all for a love that appeared synonymous with suffering. Her hands instinctively covered her ears, a feeble attempt to shut out the overwhelming tumult within her mind. She hunched over, the emotion within her a tempest of confusion, frustration, and emptiness. Her gaze shifted upwards, vacant eyes reflecting the abyss of her inner turmoil. An unsettling exhaustion swept over her, a weariness born not from physical exertion but from the convoluted maelstrom of emotions and revelations. She felt like a puppet ensnared in the intricate strings of a narrative she couldn't control, a prisoner of circumstances beyond her understanding. Meanwhile, back at the lodge, guards bustled around Magnus, their movements frantic and urgent. The antidote they administered was meant to counteract the effects of the drug. But the process wasn't without its tumultuous repercussions. Seizures racked his body, his consciousness trapped in a disorienting haze. As his eyes fluttered open, he found himself grappling with uncertainty and confusion. Where was Miss Lena? Her absence left a void, a stark contrast to the reassuring presence he had grown accustomed to. He recalled her revelation. He was not her beast. He was human. Her newfound gentleness was as unexpected as it was soothing. Yet, even in this newfound clarity, he remained imprisoned. The guards closed the door, casting the room into darkness. Dread settled over him. The darkness held memories of past torment, an abyss of nightmares that he could not escape. A soft plea for help escaped his lips, but the silence remained unbroken. A tap on his shoulder shattered the silence, the touch foreign yet familiar. Turning, he expected to see Lady Lena, but two men greeted him instead. Their jeering words cut through the air, a cruel reminder of his status. The mention of hunting in the forest transported him to a memory, one he struggled to grasp. Mutt, the mocking voice called him, and he felt a pang of recognition. Big brother, he hesitated, his voice a whisper. It was as if pieces of his fragmented past were resurfacing, assembling the puzzle of his identity. Magnus stood at the precipice of his nightmare, reliving the torment that had once defined his existence. The jeers and taunts of his companions cut through the air, each word a cruel lash against his fragile aspirations. They dangled the promise of acknowledgement before him, a treasure he so desperately craved. As they strode ahead, they continued to belittle him, comparing him to the very prey they hunted. His attempts to reason with them, to question the purpose of killing animals for sport, fell on deaf ears. Their response was a venomous gaze that dismissed his compassion. Doubt echoed in their words. Did he still want to be their brother? They wielded his yearning for acceptance as a weapon, exploiting his vulnerability. Magnus stammered in protest, denying their insinuation, desperate to hold on to the fragile bond that linked them. Yet, his brother produced a basket of sandwiches, a peace offering that hid malevolent intent. Magnus's heart raced as he accepted the sandwich, only to have it callously discarded and trampled upon. Their laughter echoed in the air like mocking taunts, a chorus that chipped away at his already fragile self-esteem. Resigned to follow their lead, he allowed himself to be pulled deeper into their world. The ache to belong, to be embraced by the camaraderie he so envied, was palpable. And yet, the more he tried to fit in, the more he seemed to fade into insignificance. The scene shifted, and he found himself perched precariously on the edge of a cliff, a sinister blade poised at his throat. His brother's face twisted into a malicious grin, a reflection of the torment Magnus endured at his hands. Fear gnawed at him as his brother's cruel taunts pushed him closer to the precipice. With a final shove, he was sent hurtling into the abyss, the malicious laughter following him into the void. Gasping for air, Magnus awoke from his nightmarish trance. His body was drenched in sweat, his heart racing as if he had just narrowly escaped the very edge of that cliff. He clung to his arm, as if grounding himself to reality. Illyana's voice broke through the remnants of the nightmare, her reassurance a lifeline that pulled him back to the present. Gradually, his shivering subsided, and he found himself alone. Illyana had left to speak with Carl, discussing his condition. The seizures had subsided, and the need for constant antidote consumption was no more. Magnus lay still, the tension gradually dissipating as he collected his scattered thoughts. When Illyana returned, she found Magnus awake, his gaze still carrying the weight of his recent ordeal. She observed the subtle changes in him, his healthier complexion, the added height, and the diminishing scent of Ray. The aroma of the drug, which had once been overpowering, now seemed to linger in the background. Their conversation flowed, his voice lightening as he shared his newfound insights from the books he had been reading. The knowledge he gained seemed to invigorate him, adding a spark to his eyes. Yet, beneath the surface, Illyana sensed a more profound shift in him. The deep-rooted need for companionship, for a connection that extended beyond the bounds of a pet, was palpable. As he spoke, his grip on Illyana's shoulder tightened, a gesture that spoke of longing and attachment. His words carried a bittersweet note. Humans weren't always together, but pets and their owners shared an unbreakable bond until the very end. The affectionate, almost wistful, tone in his voice unveiled a deeper truth. He yearned to stay by Miss Lena's side, not just as a pet, but as a presence that held meaning and significance in her life. Illyana's mind raced as she recalled her recent conversation with Carl. The topic of undoing brainwashing had been an attempt to uncover a way to free Magnus from the clutches of his conditioning. Carl had shed light on the limitations of such efforts, the resilience of the mind or the cyclical nature of new orders being given to overwrite previous programming. It was a somber realization that both she and the original Illyana had resorted to manipulating Magnus to serve their own agendas. As Magnus enveloped her in a gentle embrace from behind, his voice soft and imploring, Illyana's heart skipped a beat. His plea resonated, his words promising unwavering loyalty. She turned to meet his gaze, a tender smile playing on her lips, yet her mind was a battlefield of conflicting emotions. Magnus's admission tugged at her heartstrings. He revealed that the thought of becoming human held the fear of separation from her. The sincerity in his eyes was undeniable. But what puzzled her most was his affection, his deep liking for her. It was a question she dared to ask, and his answer, though hesitant, hinted at a deeper connection. However, an unsettling truth loomed beneath the surface. His emotions, his very responses, were sculpted by Illyana's manipulation. The realization was a stark reminder of the power she held over him. A pang of guilt tugged at her conscience. How much of his feelings were genuine, and how much were a result of her actions? Magnus's cheeks flushed under her gaze, a tender vulnerability that spoke of his earnestness. Illyana's internal struggle continued, a battle between the original Illyana's emotions and her own growing attachment. She wanted to protect him, to guide him away from the path of cruelty that lay ahead. As Illyana comforted him, her fingers brushing against his cheek, her words carried a soothing reassurance. She urged him to embrace his humanity, to adjust to the unfamiliar feelings that surged within him. Tea was offered, a simple act of normalcy that held a deeper meaning, a respite from the chaos that surrounded them. The weight of Magnus's future hung heavy in the air. The irony was palpable. The man before her, who blushed and stammered, was destined to become a ruthless emperor. The reasons for his violent actions remained shrouded in mystery, a piece of the puzzle left unresolved in the narrative. Illyana's gaze lingered, a mixture of sadness and disbelief dancing in her eyes. His blush deepened as he caught her gaze, a hint of self-consciousness coloring his cheeks. But Illyana knew that this proximity was dangerous. She needed to maintain a distance, to guard against the impending turmoil that awaited them both. His tyrannical destiny was a storm that could consume her if she allowed herself to be drawn too close. As Illyana rose, her intention to leave clear, his desperate grip on her skirt halted her in her tracks. His tears flowed freely, a poignant plea that echoed through the room. He begged her not to go, his vulnerability shattering the facade of strength he had shown. The contradiction was stark. The same man who would become a merciless ruler was now reduced to tears, clinging to her as if his life depended on it. Kneeling before her, Magnus's eyes pleaded with a mixture of desperation and longing. Illyana's promise to stay had momentarily eased his turmoil, yet his vulnerability exposed the raw edges of his emotions. The decision she faced weighed heavily on her shoulders, the cruelty of her actions, the depth of her own feelings, and the trajectory of their entwined destinies. Her mind churned with the turmoil of her conflicting desires. How far must she push him? How cold must she be for him to release her from this spell? Could she even bring herself to give a new command, to mold his feelings once more? The notion twisted within her, a reminder of her power over him, her manipulation of his heart. As her hand brushed his head, his grip on her loosened, yet his gaze remained locked on hers. The tension in the room was palpable, a complex mixture of longing, desire, and unspoken truths. Magnus's plea for a hug stirred emotions she had suppressed, a yearning to provide comfort, to offer solace in a world where she held the string. But his actions took an unexpected turn. His grip tightened, his arms encircling her, holding her captive. The glint in his eyes, once dangerous, was now laced with need. Illyana's heart raced, her mind racing to make sense of the intensity between them. A bolt of lightning outside seemed to echo the charged atmosphere within, emphasizing his words. The revelation that he had seen through her facade shook her. His confident assertion that her feelings for him were laid bare unsettled the delicate balance they had maintained. He drew nearer, his breath against her ear as his grip tightened in her hair. His words were intimate, challenging, and laced with an arrogance that belied his vulnerable state. Illyana's unease mingled with a curiosity she struggled to suppress. She turned to leave, her resolve faltering, yet his grip remained unyielding. His desperation surged forth, his questions probing the depths of her intentions. His words were a cascade of need, desire, and vulnerability, stripping away his earlier bravado to reveal the true depths of his heart. Her steps faltered as she reached the door, his plea reverberating in her ears. She yearned to turn back, to comfort him, to hold him close. But her feet carried her forward, her own internal battle raging on. The rain outside was a reflection of the storm within her. Emotions crashed like waves against her heart, tearing at her resolve. Were these feelings truly hers, or remnants of the original Illyana's emotions imprinted onto her? She collapsed onto the wet ground, her breath ragged. The struggle within her seemed insurmountable. She clung to the belief that her emotions were not her own, that the remnants of the original Illyana were responsible for this turmoil. Gradually, the rain ceased, and a sense of clarity washed over her. The coachman offered her an umbrella, a gesture of concern that pulled her from her reverie. With a newfound determination, she made her decision. She couldn't live under the shadow of the Illyana persona for 2 years. She needed to break free from the twisted cycle that bound her to Magnus. A sense of finality settled upon her as she embraced her resolution. The tears she shed were not solely for herself but for the tangled relationship that had finally reached its breaking point. With a heavy heart, she spoke her silent farewell to Magnus, her grief already taking root within her as she turned to face an uncertain future. As Illyana roamed through the streets of Cotton, children's laughter echoed around her. Their carefree play seemed to contrast sharply with the intricate web of thoughts that entangled her mind. Her attention was drawn to the sky, and she found herself remarking on the weather to herself, an ordinary comment to ground her thoughts in the present. However, her solitude was soon disrupted by the appearance of an unexpected companion. Shelia, a lively young woman, bounded over to Illyana, playfully jumping onto her back. Illyana's surprise was evident, but Shelia paid no heed to her reserved demeanor. Despite Illyana's attempts to keep her distance, Shelia proved insistent in her friendship. Shelia's energy was contagious, and Illyana found herself running alongside her new acquaintance. The training for priesthood, which she initially thought to be mundane, turned out to be a grueling schedule of classes and prayer sessions. The only solace she found was in the thought of Magnus, who served as a constant anchor to her resolve. The daily routine stretched from dawn till nightfall, leaving little room for respite. Illyana's noble status brought her attention that she neither desired nor welcomed. Yet, she learned to tune out the prying eyes and carry on with her studies, keeping her ultimate goal in mind, to let time pass. Even after classes, Shelia's relentless inquisitiveness persisted. Illyana answered her questions reluctantly, appreciating the effort but often falling back into her own thoughts. One day, as they walked together, Illyana halted abruptly. A forgotten task beckoned her back, and she feigned an excuse to part from Shelia briefly. A wave and a smile masked the ulterior motive, for Illyana's true intention lay elsewhere. Shelia's hair color reminded her painfully of Magnus, a reminder that pricked at her heart like a thorn. She had not truly forgotten him, despite the facade she wore for the outside world. Her heart still ached for him, and the burden of their separation bore heavily upon her. In the midst of her thoughts, a shout snapped her back to reality. Lost in her contemplation, she had inadvertently wandered toward a side building. Her gaze fell upon a scene of hooded figures gathered around a priest. The priest spoke of dark characters from myths, leading to a forbidden book of prophecy, a relic that held the power to unveil the Empire's future. Unease crept over her as she listened to their discussion. Her knowledge of the novel's events was thrown into turmoil. There had been no mention of such a book in the story. As the hooded leader drew his sword and struck down the priest, Illyana's heart raced. She instinctively covered her mouth to stifle a gasp. Frozen in fear, Illyana watched as the events unfolded before her eyes. The urgency of the situation weighed heavily on her mind. She understood that discovery in her current hiding place could lead to her demise. The shadows concealed her trembling form as she desperately sought a way to escape the unfolding danger. A newfound determination sparked within her. She needed to find out more about this forbidden book of prophecy, to understand the significance it held for the Empire and its people. But for now, her immediate concern was to evade the eyes of the hooded figures and ensure her survival. With her heart pounding, Illyana's thoughts raced, weaving a path through the labyrinthine corridors of her mind as she plotted her next move. As Illyana's heart raced and adrenaline coursed through her veins, she managed to evade the leader's pursuit by a hair's breadth. She found herself safely hidden within the library, her breathing ragged as she tried to process the harrowing encounter she had just witnessed. A priest, killed so ruthlessly. It was a reality that shook her to her core. Her thoughts whirled, desperately seeking a course of action. She realized she couldn't trust anyone with this information. Revealing what she had seen could put her life in grave danger. Yet, the weight of the priest's death rested heavily on her conscience. As she checked out the books she had been reading, her mind remained torn between the urge to do something and the need to protect herself. Illyana's research within the library yielded only scattered fragments of information about the elusive Book of Prophecy. Its existence was acknowledged, but the details were shrouded in myth and inconsistency. Frustration gnawed at her as she grappled with the enigma of the forbidden tome. The omission of the book's mention in the novel perplexed her, and she was left wondering what other secrets the narrative had concealed. Her thoughts swirled as she walked among her fellow trainees, overhearing hushed conversations about the murdered priest. The gravity of the situation was undeniable, and she felt a sense of urgency to distance herself from the unfolding turmoil. Clutching her borrowed books, Illyana hurried past, silently praying that her connection to the events would remain unnoticed. In the confines of the cabin, Magnus writhed in torment, his mind consumed by a cocktail of emotions. He felt abandoned and betrayed by the one person who had shown him kindness. Nightmares tormented his restless sleep, and he cried out in desperation, his voice echoing in the empty space around him. He couldn't comprehend why she had left him, why she hadn't come to soothe his anguish. As the silence weighed heavily on his senses, loneliness became an unrelenting adversary. Anger bubbled within him, fueled by the abandonment he felt. His confusion gave way to a startling revelation. It was as if a fog had lifted, revealing a truth that had been obscured for so long, his own identity. Magnus Die Cloud. The realization hit him with clarity, as if he had always known his name deep down. A wicked smile curled his lips as the pieces of his fragmented memory began to assemble. He recalled the affectionate term she often used, Mag. It was a moniker she had bestowed upon him all along. With newfound clarity, he affirmed his identity. The boy who had once been trapped in the shadow of the beast was now Magnus. A surge of determination coursed through him. He was no longer the vulnerable creature she had manipulated and controlled. He had become human, and with that transformation, a burning desire for vengeance ignited within him. His voice, once filled with vulnerability, now resonated with a newfound confidence. Your beast has finally become a human, he murmured to himself, relishing the taste of his liberation. With an ominous promise, he declared, I'm coming for you, my Lena. Underneath the shade of a tree, Illyana found a moment of respite as she contemplated the passing months. The report she had just received brought a satisfied smile to her lips. Magnus had finally managed to escape. Her plan was proceeding according to the path she had carefully laid out. In the grand narrative, his flight would lead him to a chance meeting with a doctor, an encounter that would eventually set the stage for his fateful involvement with the female lead. In her calculations, a slight shift in their timeline wouldn't create significant distortions. After all, there was a buffer of nearly a year before the story officially began. Illyana felt a sense of relief knowing that things were falling into place, aligning with her strategic orchestration. However, her moment of satisfaction was abruptly shattered as icy water drenched her from above. The shock of it left her gasping, and she instinctively looked up to identify the source. It was Simon, a fellow trainee priest who harbored a palpable dislike for Illyana. Insincere apologies tumbled from their lips, thinly veiling their intent. Even as the water dripped down her, Illyana couldn't help but comment on how radiant she must still look. Simon's anger flared, and she resorted to insults, labeling Illyana as stupid. In response, Illyana calmly informed Simon that, in her endeavor to belittle her, she had managed to wet a book borrowed from the temple. The revelation struck Simon like a bolt of lightning, widening her eyes in alarm. As the verbal altercation continued, Illyana refused to stoop to Simon's level. She refused to allow petty bullying to consume her attention, especially not when she had weightier concerns to address. She remained composed, addressing Simon's accusations with equanimity. Her words resonated with a calm resolve, expressing her disdain for unwarranted cruelty. Simon's accusations questioned Illyana's motivations for pursuing the priesthood, implying ulterior motives. Illyana didn't deny her claims outright, acknowledging that her reasons might indeed be different from what they seem. However, she asserted that her actions wouldn't involve acts of treachery or malicious intent. Her gaze bore into Simon's, firm and unyielding, as she confronted the intolerance masked by faith. Leaving Simon to confront her own reflections, Illyana departed, her steps guided by a clear conscience. Trivial acts of hostility couldn't diminish her determination or deter her from her goals. She had more pressing matters at hand, particularly regarding those who had been conspicuously absent since that ominous encounter. Meanwhile, hidden among the treetops, a watchful figure observed the unfolding scene with keen interest. Their attention shifted from the verbal confrontation to the spectacle below. Two princes racing frantically, their personal knight their only protection from an unseen pursuer. The observer recognized the third prince, Magnus, who had returned to the kingdom a year prior. Magnus' presence seemed to be the catalyst for the chaos. He strolled leisurely into the clearing, a dangerous smile curving his lips. The observer's eyes sparkled with amusement, their intrigue piqued by the unfolding drama. They mused over the impending showdown, wondering who would emerge victorious and seize the throne. The chase led the princes to the edge of a cliff, their options dwindling to a dead end. Magnus taunted them, his voice laced with mockery. He questioned their anxiety, casually dismissing their ordeal as a simple hunt. The crown prince's retort was swift, laced with defiance as he denounced Magnus' pursuit of revenge. Magnus, however, had no intention of carrying out the vengeance himself. Dark tendrils of black smoke began to encircle him, forming an ominous mass. The observer's gaze remained locked on the scene, intrigued by the unfolding narrative. They listened intently as Magnus unveiled his plan, a carefully orchestrated accident that would appear to be the result of a brutal beast attack. The black smoke converged to give shape to a fearsome creature, a manifestation of Magnus' calculated scheme. As the crown prince's voice rang out in defiance, Magnus' smile grew even more sinister. With wicked delight, he reminded his brothers not to incite the beast's anger, knowing it would only lead to their doom. The tension in the air was palpable as the enormous creature lunged forward, its massive paws pounding the ground in pursuit of the princes. From the precipice of the cliff, Magnus observed the futile attempt of his two brothers to escape the relentless beast. A satisfied smile graced his lips as their efforts were in vain. The creature's menacing pursuit had caught them regardless of their actions. This was the revenge he had yearned for, a culmination of his long-standing thirst for vengeance. The beast itself seemed to possess a sentience beyond its ferocity, engaging in a twisted dialogue with Magnus. Was this enough? The beast inquired. Magnus shook his head in response. No, he uttered with a steely resolve. This was merely a stepping stone on his journey towards his ultimate goal, his beloved Illyana. The beast regarded him with a mix of amusement and curiosity. It pledged to remain by his side as he continued to traverse a path of despair and anger, propelling him towards the fate he ardently sought. In a different corner of their world, Illyana was abruptly awakened from her slumber as Shulia's voice rang out, shattering the tranquility of the library. She had been seeking refuge amongst stacks of books, spending countless hours immersed in study. The end of her exams had brought a temporary respite, yet her mind remained unsettled. Ever since the incident involving Simon in the wet book, Illyana had been grappling with a sense of restlessness. Simon's bullying persisted, though Shulia's intervention had managed to temper its intensity. However, Illyana's focus had shifted towards an altogether different pursuit, the elusive Book of Prophecy. Her search had thus far proven fruitless, leading her to question its very existence. Amidst her musings, Illyana's attention was drawn to the newsletter Shulia was reading. The news it contained was shocking and disconcerting. The emperor had passed away, and the two princes had been found dead near a cliff. Magnus had ascended to the throne, named the successor by their late father. A chill ran down Illyana's spine as she absorbed the information. Magnus had orchestrated the deaths of his own brothers. The weight of the revelations was palpable, and Illyana struggled to contain her emotions. Shulia, sensing her distress, advised her to seek some much-needed rest in the dorms. As Illyana contemplated the tumultuous events she had learned of, Shulia made another suggestion. The coronation of the new emperor was scheduled to take place in the capital. If Illyana hurried, she might be able to attend. Illyana's response was a gentle smile, belying her true feelings. She knew she could never bring herself to attend such an event, to stand amidst the cheers for the man she had come to both fear and pity. The remnants of their painful past still lingered within her, refusing to be easily erased. Back at the capital, the grand coronation unfolded amidst a mix of whispered doubts and forced praise. Nobles observed as the crown was placed upon Magnus' head, a weighty symbol of his newfound power. Yet, their murmurs carried skepticism, questioning the legitimacy of his claim to the throne. Whispers of suspicion regarding his involvement in his brother's deaths hung in the air, but fear silenced any open opposition. In the grand hall, shouts of praise resounded, filling the space with the resonance of a new era. The chorus of jubilation swept through the empire, resonating in cities and villages alike. A new reign had commenced under the rule of Emperor Magnus Die Cloud, a figure both lauded and feared. Meanwhile, Illyana sat in a hall of her own, surrounded by fellow trainee priests. A sense of accomplishment permeated the air as a priest delivered a closing speech, congratulating all on completing their rigorous 2-year training. For Illyana, the culmination of her time here meant one thing: her imminent return to the capital. As the priest's words reached their conclusion, Illyana's thoughts turned to Magnus and the intricate threads of destiny that now connected them. For both of them, this moment marked the dawn of a new chapter, one that would weave their lives together in ways they could scarcely anticipate. Upon returning to the Glane estate, Illyana couldn't shake off the eerie feeling of preparedness that enveloped the mansion. It was as if they had been expecting her sudden arrival, despite her abrupt departure and unannounced return. The butler's words hung in the air, informing her that the Marquis awaited her presence. A sense of trepidation overcame her as she ascended the steps, her heart pounding with each step. The mention of her father's desire to dine with her and discuss the past 2 years made her steps falter. Her father's nonchalant demeanor when she left home had puzzled her, but it now seemed he had known all along about her whereabouts. Illyana entered her room, mulling over the intricate web of knowledge the Marquis possessed. As she soaked in the bath, fragrant rose petals clung to her skin, a stark contrast to the once bruised canvas she had carried. Marquis Glane was a figure that had only been mentioned in passing within the novel, when Magnus had exacted his revenge upon the Glane family. He had discovered the Marquis drenched in the blood of his own wife, a grim sight that had left an indelible impression on Magnus. The Marquis's sinister visage had been adorned with the symbol of his wife's tragic demise, waiting for the Emperor's arrival. Now, another formidable obstacle stood in Illyana's path, her own father. It was clear that the Marquis was far from oblivious to her activities, and she needed to tread carefully to evade the persistent clutches of Magnus, who still sought her. Illyana had to navigate her interactions with her father while secretly delving into the enigma that was Magnus. This intricate dance required her to remain inconspicuous within the social world. As the maids assisted her in dressing, Illyana focused on the role she had to play. She had to be astute and unassuming, portraying a facade of obedience and compliance. The stakes were higher than ever, and she needed to keep her true intentions hidden. Entering the dining room, Illyana found her father already seated at the table. His soft utterance of her name sent a shiver down her spine, a subtle yet palpable reminder of his power. She forced a smile and took her seat, her anxiety gnawing at her. The Marquis's inquiries sliced through the tense atmosphere. He questioned her about her freedom during the past 2 years, a bitter twist in his tone. The mention of her devotion to her studies and the freeing of her pet, a clear reference to Magnus, hung heavily in the air. His amusement at her endeavors was chilling, an insidious reminder of his control over her life. Shock momentarily paralyzed her, rendering her speechless. His gaze, cold and calculating, never wavered. He observed her with an intensity that sent shivers down her spine. She struggled to respond, her voice faltering as his words sliced through her composure. He criticized her apparent lapse in manners, delivering his admonishment with an air of superiority. Illyana stammered to reply, but he wasn't interested in her excuses. The Marquis's gaze remained unwavering, his piercing eyes a testament to his dominance. Illyana's heart raced as terror gripped her, squeezing her chest in a suffocating embrace. The memories of her past, the bruises and the scars, resurfaced with renewed intensity. The haunting specter of her own vulnerability, her past as a victim of domestic abuse, lurked in the shadows of her mind. Fear coiled around her like a tightening noose, threatening to choke out her resolve. Her voice remained trapped within, unable to articulate her thoughts as her father's stern gaze bore into her. The Marquis's annoyance grew palpable in the silence that stretched between them. In the aftermath of his declaration, a chilling command that would tether her to the estate, Illyana found herself frozen, her very freedom in jeopardy. Desperation clawed at her, urging her to react before the final verdict was set. With a surge of courage, she leapt to her feet and cried out, "Father." Her words, laced with urgency, held a plea she hoped he would heed. However, his response held no sympathy. He continued, unyielding, his steps carrying him towards the exit. The oppressive weight of his command pressed upon her, threatening to shatter the fragile facade she had constructed. Refusing to submit to this newfound imprisonment, Illyana's mind raced for a way to circumvent her father's decree. Panic and determination intertwined within her, fueling a spark of inspiration. An idea sprouted, a calculated gamble to sway his decision. As he turned to leave, Illyana summoned the strength to speak. She feigned a tremor in her voice, weaving a tale of a fever-induced amnesia that had stolen her memories. She recounted the cold water incident at the temple, emphasizing its role in her memory loss. Every word was a carefully crafted thread, interwoven with vulnerability and feigned confusion. Illyana's eyes glistened with tears as she described her blurred childhood recollections, even going so far as to suggest that her own father seemed foreign to her in this haze. She embraced the cliched narrative of amnesia, hoping it would lend her plea an air of credibility. Despite her emotional performance, the Marquis's expression remained unchanged, an unreadable mask that concealed his thoughts. His demeanor held a stoic resolve, unyielding to her emotional appeal. With a curt nod, he departed, leaving Illyana to contemplate the aftermath of her gambit. The room's stillness settled over her, and she sank into the chair, her heart pounding in anticipation. Had her ruse succeeded, or had her father seen through her act? Uncertainty gnawed at her, leaving her feeling both exposed and vulnerable. Illyana's mind swirled with the implications of her actions. A web of deceit had been spun, and the delicate threads connected her fate to her father's decisions. Her chest tightened with anxiety as she pondered what lay ahead. The checkup, the relearning, and the looming threat of punishment. Exhaustion washed over her, a byproduct of the emotional turmoil she had navigated. Her body felt heavy, her mind weary from the mental acrobatics she had performed. As she sank deeper into the chair, her thoughts wavered between hope and dread. Had she managed to deceive her father? Or was she now entangled in a more intricate game than she had bargained for? Meanwhile, in his secluded office, the Marquis contemplated the day's events. The butler stood at attention, awaiting his instructions. He knew precisely what needed to be done. Locate the one responsible for dousing Illyana with water and maintain a watchful eye over her behavior. The Marquis's fingers brushed the surface of a letter, one sent from a persistent source that refused to be ignored, Magnus. The Marquis's lips curled into a wry smile as he held the letter to the flame, watching as the paper ignited and crumbled to ash. The young emperor's bold words were reduced to ephemeral wisps, disappearing into nothingness. The flames danced before him, casting an eerie glow across his features. The Marquis's gaze remained fixed, his thoughts shrouded in secrecy. Letters from Magnus had been arriving incessantly, a testament to the emperor's determination to maintain a connection. Illyana's regret simmered beneath the surface as she sat at the desk, her eyes scanning yet another dense volume. How she wished she could turn back time and make a different choice, to eat that fateful dinner, to avoid inviting this unbearable ordeal upon herself. The consequences of her defiance had woven her into a web of relentless challenges, and now her very sustenance hung in the balance. The Marquis's decree had left her in a state of disbelief. The absurdity of the situation had not escaped her. Banned from eating due to a single unanswered question, Illyana found herself caught in the clutches of a merciless puzzle, the stakes of which were her own survival. A single miscalculation, a misremembered fact, could lead to hunger's cruel embrace. A soft knock at the door signaled the arrival of her next trial, dinner, or rather, quiz time. Illyana's heart quickened, and she straightened her posture, preparing herself for the interrogation that lay ahead. She had to succeed this time or face the dire consequences of her failure. The Marquis, seated across from her, partook in his meal as if it were a leisurely activity, his cold gaze fixed upon her. Illyana felt the weight of his scrutiny, the intensity of his expectations pressing down upon her. Her hands rested neatly in her lap, a facade of calm she meticulously maintained. He questioned her, probing the depths of her knowledge. This time, she was prepared. She answered confidently, her voice steady as she listed the official departments of the Imperial Palace, the Ministry of Finance, the Imperial Family, the Inner Palace, and the Treasurer. She continued, mentioning the two special institutions, the Medical Division and the Order of Chivalry, also known as the Imperial Knights of Storm. Her correct response earned her a rare smile from the Marquis, a display of approval that she had not anticipated. This glimpse of a different side to him, one not characterized by sternness and severity, caught her off guard. The emotion that danced across his features was a revelation, leaving her both unsettled and fascinated. As the meal progressed, Illyana's own anxiety began to ebb. The Marquis's demeanor had shifted, surprising her with his openness to her suggestion about discipline. His acknowledgement that starving her was indeed preferable to physical punishment struck her with a pang of bitter irony. The twisted scale of comparison he presented underscored the depth of her predicament. With the conclusion of her lesson, the Marquis rose from his seat, signaling the end of the evening's grueling session. However, his parting words bore a promise of the challenges that awaited her. He hinted at a new lesson on the horizon, leaving her to wonder what trials she would be subjected to next. Their conversation shifted to the political landscape, and Illyana's heart clenched as the Marquis mentioned the new emperor's attempts to bridge the gap between the imperial family and the aristocracy. The notion of a banquet held to facilitate this reconciliation sent shivers down her spine. Her father's mention of her invitation to the event was both expected and unsettling, a reminder of the inexorable path her life was being led down. As if peering into her thoughts, the Marquis addressed her concerns directly. His declaration that he did not wish for her to be the Emperor's Empress held an unexpected air of understanding. Illyana's gaze met his, a mix of gratitude and wariness in her eyes. He had recognized her anxiety, revealing a facet of his character that she had never seen before. Her mind spun with thoughts and apprehensions. The novel's hazy description of the banquet paled in comparison to the reality she faced. The looming encounter between the Emperor and Illyana Glane, a convergence that could alter the course of their intertwined fates, hung heavy in the air. Illyana reclined on the bed, a heavy sigh escaping her lips. The day she had been dreading had arrived, casting a shadow over her thoughts. The banquet at the palace loomed on the horizon, a gathering that held the potential to reshape her life's trajectory. Her mind drifted to the novel's pages, where her character's fate was entwined with Magnus's at this very event. The urgency to prevent such a convergence weighed heavily on her mind. As she splashed cool water on her face, the droplets seemed to wash away her apprehensions momentarily. The mirror reflected her tense expression, her eyes reflecting the turmoil that churned within her. Tonight, Emperor Magnus Die Cloud might seek her out. Driven by the narrative's inexorable pull, Illyana was determined to outmaneuver fate and keep their paths from intersecting. She pondered her options, analyzing the possibilities. The banquet offered an intricate dance of deception and strategy, a stage upon which she needed to perform with precision. With hours to spare before departing for the palace, Illyana found herself in the garden, following the maid's suggestion of having tea to pass the time. Sitting within an open pavilion, she observed the serene surroundings, the tranquility of the garden a stark contrast to the tempestuous storm brewing within her heart. The stillness seemed almost too perfect, as if nature itself held its breath, anticipating the turmoil that would soon unfold. A voice cut through her reverie, and Illyana's gaze shifted to see her father approaching. His presence was unexpected, his demeanor uncharacteristically awkward. She greeted him with feigned innocence, her demeanor a careful facade that hid her racing thoughts. The exchange felt unusual, each word carrying a weight she couldn't decipher. The Marquis joined her at the table, the air tense with unsaid words. As they exchanged greetings, his unease was palpable, and Illyana couldn't help but wonder about the source of his discomfort. Was it her newfound sweetness that caught him off guard, or was there something else he had discovered? Their conversation turned to the forthcoming banquet, a topic that both intrigued and alarmed her. He informed her of her assigned residence for the week, the Moon Spring Palace. The choice of dwelling reflected the Glane family's historical significance, something Illyana hadn't anticipated. The realization that Magnus had obliterated a founding family of the Empire to erase her from existence sent a shiver down her spine. As the Marquis departed, leaving her with a disquieting silence, Illyana's mind whirred with thoughts. Magnus's actions were becoming clear, his motivations tangled in a web of resentment and obsession. The Marquis's departure left her alone, a sense of unease settling upon her like a weight. Her journey to the palace marked another turning point in her story. As Illyana ascended the grand staircase, she felt a strange mix of apprehension and determination. Clad in her signature red dress, she embodied Illyana Glane, resolute and prepared to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Approaching the palace's imposing facade, Illyana's heart raced as she considered the possibility of encountering Magnus within its walls. Though her name had changed, her history rewritten, the undeniable thread of destiny still tugged at her existence. She couldn't shake the feeling that their paths might cross, even if by chance. Taking a deep breath, Illyana tried to steady her racing heart. The anticipation of the banquet had brought an unsettling nervousness that refused to be quelled. She had arrived at the palace an hour early, a strategic move to avoid an immediate encounter with Magnus. But even with her calculated approach, her heart still raced like a wild stallion, reminding her of the volatile nature of the situation. Positioned at the entrance doors, she took a moment to gather herself. She closed her eyes briefly, seeking a fleeting moment of calm before the storm. Clasping her hands together, she straightened her posture, adopting an air of confidence she hoped would carry her through the night. In this moment, she was not Illyana who had read the novel, but Illyana Glane, a young woman ready to navigate the complexities of high society. The herald's voice broke through her thoughts, offering her the option to enter. With a deep breath, she pushed open the doors, entering the grand hall with a purposeful stride. The weight of the room's gaze settled on her, the whispers and murmurs of the nobles creating a cacophony of intrigue and judgment. The talk centered around her previous devotion as a priest, her fervent belief in God casting her in a unique light among the elite. She focused on maintaining her outward composure, determined not to show any vulnerability. As she moved forward, she heard the murmurs growing louder, cutting through the air like a swarm of bees. Amidst the voices, one lady's snide remark about her background stung. She leaned against a wall, sipping champagne with an air of nonchalance. The insults were meant to rile her, meant to remind her of her supposed place. But she had endured worse and wouldn't be shaken so easily. As she observed the crowd, her eyes were drawn to the conspicuous number of ladies with hair shades resembling white. It seemed to be a prevailing trend, an unintentional advantage that allowed her to blend in seamlessly. A self-satisfied smirk tugged at her lips. Now, she truly wouldn't stand out in this sea of pale hair. A sudden announcement echoed through the hall, signaling Magnus's arrival. She felt a jolt of surprise, her heart skipping a beat. He commanded attention, his presence eliciting immediate obeisance from the assembled nobles. With practiced grace, she merged into the crowd, her movements purposeful yet understated. It was fine, she wouldn't be spotted. The mask she had worn in his presence, along with her now whitened hair, would effectively veil her identity. As Magnus took his seat, the room's atmosphere shifted, a mixture of tension and expectancy hanging in the air. Illyana couldn't help but watch him, her gaze drawn to the man who had once held her heart captive. But there was no trace of the gentle Mag she had known, the man who smiled at her and hung on to her every word. Before her sat Emperor Magnus, a figure of power and enigma. The announcement of another guest, Cheryl Cynthia, drew her attention. She watched as the female lead approached Magnus, his smile reserved for her. An unfamiliar emotion stirred within Illyana, a mixture of resentment and jealousy. The sensation caught her off guard, the intensity of it surprising her.